Welcome to the Goofy 3D print and build. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get some Milliput out because this kit has some gaps in it we have to take care of. So I'm just going to take some out of the box. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut this down into equal parts. This way when we smash them together, it'll work right and we'll be able to fill those parts in. This stuff takes about 4 hours to set up. And then once it's all set up, it's very easy to sand and then prime and paint over. So as you see, I got my gloves on because I don't want this stickiness all over my hands. So I'm just going to take the parts and I'm going to push them together and just keep kneading this. And it takes about 5 minutes to get it really going because it is kind of hard. As you can see, I'm struggling with this stuff a little bit. But once it's one solid color like this, I mush it up just a little more. And then I'm going to start filling in the parts that we need to fill in with this. The first thing I'm going to fill in is the bottom, the holes in the bottom. I really don't have to fill these in. I just wanted to fill them in to show you. But these holes on the chainsaw, we have to fill them in because those are just too big and too obvious. So those are all filled in. I'm just waiting for those to dry. Then I'll sand them down and we'll prime everything. On Goofy, I have his nose and his chin to do. Take care of those because we can't have a big hole in Goofy's chin. The hole in his nose there was a gap where resin could get caught in. So when you're 3D printing, really watch out for stuff like that. The next thing I'm doing is I'm taking water, just smoothing this out. This way you can get a nice blend on it and prime it over later. The gaps continue on this build. I had to cut out the keys on here. This way the arms would fit in. I just took my Dremel, opened this up as you can see here. I'm going to go through this real quick so you don't have to listen to the noise, but just chop it down and test until you get a nice smooth fit like that. I had to do the same thing with the other arm. There was a pretty big gap and you can see I took a lot of the key out and then I just keep test fitting because I really don't want those gaps because I don't want to have to make so much Milliput and wait for dry time. This way I can sand all that down. I cut off half of the key on the bottom half of his legs just because it was such a horrible fit, and I took out the key on the inside and I put them together. And then you'll see when I turn this guy around, he's got a big old gap on the back there. The front came out pretty well, but it still has a little bit of a crease that we're going to have to take care of with the Milliput. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some DAP Rapid Fuse on there. I'm going to slap them together, hold them for a few seconds until that sets up, and then I'm going to put a little kicker on there. This way it could go quicker. I made myself some more Milliput, of course. This way I could fill in the gap in the front and the back and take care of all of that. Kneading it up this time barehanded, and I'm just going to start smushing it in here and fill in that gap because we don't want that gap in the front. I kind of tilted it a little bit front and back. This way I didn't have so much of a gap in the back, and I just filled it in all the way around. You can see here it's nice and smooth. The next thing I'm going to do is sand it down. There still probably is going to be a little bit of a mismatch between the top of his apron and the bottom of his apron, so I'm not going to make any more Milliput. What I did here, I just took my Bondo and I filled in the rest of that gap, and then I smoothed it out. The Bondo works very well too. You just don't want to use the one part Bondo in a huge gap like that because it just keeps sinking in there, and you'll have to freaking go crazy filling it in. If you're going to do it with Bondo, do 2-part. As you can see here, I primed it up and you can't even see the line anymore. It came out really, really well. It just takes some time and practice working with fillers and stuff like that, and you can make a lot of stuff invisible. The next thing we're doing is we're putting his head on, and you can see again, more gaps in this guy, and there's no way I want to leave that gap around his neck because it looks totally horrible. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to use some DAP Rapid Fuse, and I'm going to put that around his neck instead of trying to fill it in with Milliput. I don't know if you really could see it there, but it's a little shiny when I turn his head. Right there, I put the DAP Rapid Fuse in. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a needle file, and I'm going to take all of that down. I'm just going to gently. Remember, gently use your needle files, the metal ones, because you can really gouge out what you're doing. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this really quick and let it go time-lapse right now. But all I'm doing is cutting in all of the black, and most of the paints here I'm using Monument Hobbies. Right here with the black, I know this is supposed to be a flesh tone. What I'm doing here is I'm putting the black in because when I put the flesh tone on after that, this is just a black base coat. I want that flesh to be just a little bit darker. So I'll let you watch the rest of the painting and I'll be back in a second. And that's it. We finally got all of the black on his tie, his neck, his mouth, his nose, his hair, underneath his legs down there. So now once I'm done with all this, we're going to start cutting in that flesh tone for his mouth. The mouth flesh tone is going to be different than his apron and his mask, so I'll let you just watch the painting process again. Now that his mouth is all done up, it's in that lighter flesh tone like I said it was going to be. The next thing we're going to do is start on a flesh tone on his mask. This is going to be a slightly darker flesh tone because if we put the same flesh tone as his mouth, it's going to look goofy, no pun intended. So here you can see that the flesh tone up there is darker. It's more of a tan flesh tone compared to his mouth, which is a lighter flesh tone. I did paint his teeth white because we have to have Goofy's iconic teeth white. This is where I painted his eyes with the white and the black. But I think he looked a little too crazy there and not menacing. So you see later on in the video that his eyes are going to be black instead. You guys took a vote on that. So now that that's done, I'm going to start cutting in all the base colors on his boots, his pants, his apron, all that good stuff, his shirt. So I'll let you watch the painting process and see what I did for this. And his pants and his boots are all done up. I did them both in a brown. One's a lighter brown, of course, and one's a darker brown. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start painting in his apron. And this is the same flesh tone as his mask. And you can see his eyes now are totally dark. I really appreciate you guys voting on that. And I do like the dark black eye look better. Here, his apron's all done up in that flesh coat. Next up, we're going to do his shirt. His shirt I did in a bright ivory. I didn't want it to be super white, because I thought the white would just look too stark. So I did a bright ivory, and then later on we're going to throw washes on everything and make everything look dirtier. Now that's all done up. That's looking pretty darn good. I like the colors and how everything is turning out. I really couldn't complain at this point of the paint work or the figure itself. So now that the figure is done, next up we have 3 more pieces. We got to do his arms, we got to do his chainsaw, and we'll start on his arms, and the same thing I did as I did before. We're going to use that bright ivory and paint in his shirt, get that all done up so we can get eventually his arms glued onto him. Now that the shirt is done, the colors, we're going to cut in his black on his arms and the white on his gloves. We're just using that same black that we used for the bottom of his legs, his face, and all that other good stuff. That comes out really nice and flat. Next thing we're going to do is these white gloves, and that is going to be a bright white because his gloves in Disney, of course, are always a bright white. So I cut in the white. Once I was done with the white, all that solidness, this took probably about 2 or 3 coats, maybe more. I put in the little black stripes on his gloves because we can't leave those out, otherwise it wouldn't be goofy. So now let's get these onto his arm. We're just going to use some DAP Rapid Fuse. It looks like I'm using a lot. I'm really not. It's just a little bit in there. Once I push his arms on, I do hold them for about 30 seconds to make sure that they stay in place. I didn't want to use a kicker on here because I did not seal coat the paint yet and I wasn't sure what would happen. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start cutting in all the colors on the chainsaw. The body's going to be red, handles are going to be black, white on the chainsaw bar, and then of course the oily steel is going to be on the chain. So I'll let you watch me paint up the chainsaw. Now that the chainsaw is all done up, the next thing I'm going to have to do is throw some washes on there. On the white, I'm going to throw a gray wash. Of course, on the red, we're going to throw a red wash. I just want to make it look aged. And we're also going to have to get some blood splatter on that. But we'll do that a little later. Let's get to the base. What I'm doing with the base is I'm throwing on a whole bunch of different browns. And like I said, I used Monument Hobby paints, Pro Acryl for everything. I'm just throwing a few different color browns on here. I learned this from Ground Affected. It's a good technique, but I screwed up. I put way too much paint on here. As you can see, it's really wet, but it blends nicely. It gives you totally different color browns, and it really makes it look like dirt. But like I said, put too much on there. So all I did was take a paper towel and I started dabbing off that excess paint. You could see how much was on there. So you only really need a few drops to do this, and I'm gently taking off paint because I don't want to take off too much paint, because then I'll have to go back in there. So once I get all the paint off, I'm just going to let this dry and get to the effect I wanted to. Once I was done, I started cutting in the black around the rim of the base. Now this is only the first coat. I am going to go back in with a second coat, but that's after I do some more on the top of the base, and then I'll know I'm going to get the brown on the black, so we'll go back in there and fix that up. Now that all that brown is dry, I got to go back in here and bring out this detail, because we can't just have it flat like this. This kind of looks horrible. It's nice, but it looks horrible because there's no detail shown. And we're going to have to go back in and get Goofy Leatherface punched in there. This way that stands out. So to get that detail out, what we're going to do is we're going to dry brush, of course. So what I did is I just took one of the browns and I added a little white to it to make it lighter. And then I just go in here and I start dry brushing very lightly. I dry brush very slowly. I go very light and then build it up, instead of going heavy and then messing the whole thing up, and then I got to come back in, repaint it, and re-dry brush. So it's easier to build up and then to go heavy. You can see the lightness over here, so it really brings out the peaks on the dirt itself. The next thing I'm going to do is we're going to go in with some wash. This is Vallejo's wash, and this one is called Oiled Earth. So all I'm going to do is take the oiled earth and I'm going to put it all over the base. Now that I have the wash on the base, I really want to get into those deep crevices, so I add more and more wash in there. Just so it shows you the depth. But now the brown got over on the edge, so this is the second coat of black. This is going to be the last coat of black. Just going around the rim, making sure that's nice and dark. This way we can get the letters cut in. But before I cut the letters in, the next thing I'm going to do is I actually sealed in the dirt. And this is brushed on. This is AK Interactive's matte. This is just comes in a bottle. As you've seen, I haven't used an airbrush yet in the video. I cut in the Goofy Leatherface with the yellow from Monument Hobby's Pro Acryl, and that's really nice and bright. That's the only thing I wanted bright, so this way you know what the model is. If you couldn't tell it was Goofy Leatherface by the model, you probably haven't seen the movie or heard of Leatherface. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start just adding some diluted white glue to the base, and this is for our static grass that's going to be coming up. And we're going to be using our static grass maker that we made a while ago. You can go check that out on the channel somewhere. So once this is all done, we'll start putting on some static grass. Here's the static grass maker. I'm just holding the pin in, turning the machine on, shaky, 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 shake. Get all the grass on there and have those nice little patches to break up the mud. We don't want the base just to be plain. We want it to have some kind of life. Now this looks like crap because we have the sticking up grass and the grass that's on the sides over there. We just had to tap it off. I didn't want to put a lot of grass in there to make it look like it was out in the field. I just wanted enough grass on there. This way it breaks it up and you have something to look at. Now that all of that is done, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start cutting in some more colors on his boots because I wasn't happy with just that brown. So on the bottom, I used the Pro Acryl Mahogany. I used that on the straps on his boots, and golden brown, I think, in the middle. And then a mahogany or black for his laces. I don't remember which one. I think it was mahogany again for the laces. I just wanted those to pop a little bit. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start putting washes onto all of the stuff we have to, including the mask, his mouth, his shirt, apron, you name it, pants, pretty much a wash everywhere. You can see here I cut in all those little stitches with black. That was a pain in the neck. A lot of going back and forth with touch-up work because my tiny brush, for some reason, was going to the side and making a mess, but we got it done. Right here, I put on a flesh wash all over his apron, just a sludge wash. I coming back in with the Q-tips and a little bit of thinner. Or no, actually don't do that. It wasn't thinner, I'm sorry. That's water. I was taking everything off with water because if I use thinner, there would have went everything, all the paint and all that good stuff. So I just sat there rubbing everything off, as you can see, to where I wanted it. I have it nice and dirty down at the bottom. I left a lot more up the side on the edges and the creases. I left a lot of flesh wash in there because I want his apron to look really, really dingy and dirty and creepy, and that's how we got it. The next thing I got to do here is do the same thing to the mask. We're going to take the flesh wash. You see a sludge wash on here. Then I just used the Q-tip and I started taking it off. I also used the flesh wash on his mouth to bring out and highlight his mouth area. I didn't want that dingy. I didn't want that clean. I wanted it a little more dingy because he is a dirty guy. Next up, I just worked on his pants and his boots. I put a wash on there. That was all a brown wash, and just took it all off next. Over here with the wash, I left that a little stained because I didn't want his boots looking pristine either. If they look pristine, then it would be a little goofy. I keep saying that. The next thing I did was I used a brown wash on his shirt. I didn't do really too many highlights or anything like that on his shirt because, again, we want it to look dirty. This guy's killing people. He's a bum living out in the desert somewhere, and he's just not a clean guy. I can't see this guy taking baths or anything like that. So the next up we did the splatter effect with blood on his hands, on his apron, up on his mask a little bit. Unfortunately, I forgot to record that part with the blood splatters. And I will show you that technique again because I'm going to have to use it in another build. The last thing I'm doing here is I'm starting to cut in with the AK Interactive's clear coats on his boots. I did an ultra matte. On his pants, I did a regular matte. On his shirt, I did an ultra matte. And on the flesh tones, I did an ultra matte too. I don't know why I'm so crazy about things being ultra matte, but I really love the look of how flat the ultra mattes make everything. And I just really, really like the look of that. So that's all I'm doing here is I'm going over with the different kind of clear coats. And the last thing I'm doing, Goofy's iconic teeth. We're putting some gloss coat on those because we want his teeth looking a little wetter. Plus, we want those guys to stand out. Those chompers are just iconic. Next up is we're doing the chainsaw. I'm using a black wash around the edges of the chainsaw just to bring out the chain. Otherwise, it's pretty dull. And then we're going to go into the red wash onto the chainsaw body itself. Just way it looks a little grungier, it looks used up. And here is Goofy Leatherface. He's got his chainsaw in his hand, but it's not done up yet. And I lied to you. I thought I did the blood splatters before. I still forgot to film it. Here's the blood splatters now all over the place. So he looks like he was chopping up people, killing people, having a fun day. The last thing we got to do is put this chainsaw into Goofy's hand. I'm just putting a little DAP Rapid Fuse on the bottom because if you put it on the whole handle and you squish it out, it's going to come right out the top. I'm putting a little kicker on the bottom there. This way it sets in really quickly. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the kicker on the base. I'm going to get that pre-done. This way I don't have to worry about spraying it on the base. Then I'm just taking a little pin. I'm putting the DAP Rapid Fuse on the bottom of Goofy's shoes. I'm going to set him in place, hold him there for about 10 seconds, not even. He's going to lock into place. Goofy will be set up, and this will be the second in the series that's done. We did Mickey Voorhees. Now we have Goofy Leatherface done. Next up is going to be Donald Duck as Freddy Krueger. I use my blow dryer here just to dry that off to make sure all that liquid is dried up and nothing is left on the base. So I hope you enjoyed the build of Goofy Leatherface. Here he is in all his glory. Next up are the final pictures.